Rain lashed against the windshield, headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the deserted highway. Sarah glanced at the clock on the dashboard, almost midnight. She sighed, exhausted. Another late night at the office. The rhythmic swish of the wipers was hypnotic. Sarah fought to keep her eyes open. She just wanted to get home, crawl into bed, and forget about the mountain of paperwork waiting on her desk. As she rounded a bend, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, standing by the side of the road, hand outstretched. Sarah hesitated. She wasn't in the habit of picking up hitchhikers, especially not at this hour, but something about the man's desperate stance tugged at her conscience. He was drenched, shivering, his face obscured by the darkness. With a sigh, Sarah pulled over. The man practically threw himself into the car. He slammed the door shut, gasping for breath. Water streamed from his hair and clothes, pooling on the floor of her car. Thank you, he muttered, his voice trembling. You have no idea how grateful I am. Where are you headed? Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. The man's frantic energy was contagious, and a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. He avoided her gaze, his eyes darting around the car as if searching for something. Just away from here, he stammered. Please, just drive. They're after me. His words were punctuated by gasps of breath. His eyes, wide and panicked, met hers for a fleeting moment. Don't let them get me. Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Her knuckles turned white as she tried to steady her trembling hands. The road ahead was barely visible through the thick fog that had settled in, making every turn feel like a leap into the unknown. His words were the ramblings of a madman, she told herself, yet there was something in his eyes, a flicker of genuine fear that she couldn't ignore. She had picked him up on the side of the road, drenched and desperate, and now she was beginning to question that decision. Still, a shiver ran down her spine. The temperature inside the car seemed to drop with every passing second, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The man's presence was unsettling, but it was the unseen that truly terrified her. The wind howled outside like a chorus of mournful cries. It was as if the very elements were trying to warn her of the danger that lay ahead. The trees swayed violently, their branches scratching against the car windows like skeletal fingers. She could have sworn she heard whispers carried on the wind, unintelligible murmurs that sent chills down her back. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, gnawing at the edges of her sanity. Were they voices from the past or something more sinister? She stole a glance at her passenger. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. He seemed to be listening to the same whispers, his head turning slightly as if trying to catch the words. His gaze was fixed on the rearview mirror, his expression a mixture of terror and grim determination. It was as if he was expecting something or someone to appear at any moment. The tension in the car was palpable, a thick fog of dread that neither of them could escape. The man was clearly unhinged, but what had frightened him so badly? And who were they? Sarah's mind raced with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. She had to know the truth, but the answers seemed just out of reach, hidden in the shadows of the night. The car radio, which had been playing a soft melody just moments before, erupted in a cacophony of static. Sarah frowned, tapping the dial. Nothing. She tried changing stations, but all she got was the same ear-splitting noise. It was as if some unseen force was interfering with the signal. As she drove, she noticed the headlights flickering, casting dancing shadows on the deserted road. The engine sputtered, the car lurching slightly before regaining its rhythm. Her unease morphed into full-blown fear. Something was definitely wrong. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Through the sheeting rain high above the tree line, a massive shape was descending. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. A vast, inky black triangle blotting out the starless sky. It moved with an eerie silence, defying gravity, its edges blurring in and out of existence. The hitchhiker saw it too. He let out a strangled cry, burying his face in his hands. "I told you!" he screamed, his voice raw with terror. "They found me! They found me!" The world seemed to hold its breath. The rain stopped abruptly, the wind died down, and an unnerving silence descended. The kind of silence that makes you question reality, that makes you feel like you're in a dream. The streetlights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows that danced on the pavement. Sarah's gaze remained fixed on the sky, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. She had never seen anything like it before. The clouds swirled in unnatural patterns, almost as if they were alive, and the air felt charged with an electric tension. Her heart pounding in her chest, she could feel the blood rushing in her ears. She clutched her chest, trying to steady her breathing, but the fear was overwhelming. It was as if the world had shifted, and she was standing on the edge of an abyss. When she finally tore her eyes away from the otherworldly spectacle and looked at her passenger, she gasped. The seat next to her was empty. Just moments ago, a man had been sitting there. A man who had appeared out of nowhere, seeking help. The man was gone, vanished. She blinked, hoping it was just a trick of the light, but the seat remained empty. Panic set in as she frantically looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The car door was still closed, the lock firmly in place. She hadn't heard it open, hadn't felt any movement. It was as if he had simply disappeared into thin air. The windows rolled up tight, not a crack to be seen. She pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the cold surface beneath her fingers. There was no way he could have slipped out without her noticing. There was simply no way he could have gotten out. The car was a sealed box, and yet he was gone. She felt a chill run down her spine, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. 1 minute he was there, sitting beside her, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. He had been muttering something under his breath, something about being followed, about needing to get away. A terrified stranger seeking help, his hands trembling as he clutched the seat. She had tried to calm him down, to understand what he was saying, but his words had been jumbled, incoherent. And the next he was gone, without a trace. The car felt emptier than ever, the silence more oppressive. She was left with nothing but questions and a growing sense of dread. What had happened to him? And more importantly, what was going to happen next? Sarah slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. She was alone. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing. She spun around in her seat, searching frantically for any sign of the hitchhiker. Had he been real? Or was he just a figment of her exhausted mind? The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. She felt a cold dread creep into her heart, a primal fear that sent shivers down her spine. She had to get out of here, now. Sarah sped away, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. The night was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the hum of her car's engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. She could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on her, making it hard to breathe. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension. The image of the black triangle seared into her mind, a symbol that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was as if the triangle was a gateway to another world, a world that she had inadvertently stumbled into. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching her, waiting for the right moment to reveal its true purpose. The events of the night played over and over in her head, each memory more vivid and terrifying than the last. She remembered the hitchhiker she had picked up, a man with eyes that seemed to pierce through her soul. His presence had been unsettling from the start, but she had ignored her instincts, thinking she was just being paranoid. Each playback more terrifying than the last. The hitchhiker, the whispers, the way his voice seemed to echo in her mind long after he had spoken. She could still hear his words, cryptic and filled with a sense of foreboding. "You can't escape your fate," he had said, his voice a chilling whisper that sent shivers down her spine. The impossible craft in the sky, none of it made sense. It had appeared out of nowhere, a silent, hovering presence that defied all logic. She had watched in horror as it moved with an unnatural grace, its lights casting an eerie glow over the landscape. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been torn apart, revealing a glimpse of something far beyond her understanding. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the darkness, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. The light seemed to chase away the shadows, bringing with it a sense of clarity. But even as the sun rose, the memories of the night remained, etched into her mind like a scar that would never heal. Sarah pulled into her driveway. She was physically unharmed, but the encounter had left her feeling drained and vulnerable. She sat in her car for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts, but the images kept flooding back, each one more disturbing than the last. The encounter had shaken her to her core. She felt as if she had been touched by something otherworldly, something that had left a mark on her soul. She knew that she would never be the same again, that the events of this night would haunt her for the rest of her life. She knew with a certainty that chilled her blood that she had glimpsed a reality that most people would never see. It was a reality filled with mysteries and dangers that lurked just beyond the veil of the ordinary world. and she knew that she could never go back to the way things were before, that she would never forget this night. It was a night that had changed everything, a night that had opened her eyes to the hidden truths of the universe. She felt a strange mix of fear and awe, knowing that she had been a part of something much larger than herself, and she knew deep down that she had been chosen for a reason. There was a purpose to all of this, a reason why she had been drawn into this strange and terrifying world. She didn't know what that purpose was, but she was determined to find out, that she would never truly know the truth about the unwanted passenger, the man who had appeared out of nowhere, bringing with him a sense of dread and mystery. She could still see his face in her mind, a face that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets, or the terrifying mystery he had brought into her car. It was a mystery that would haunt her for the rest of her days, a puzzle that she might never solve, but she knew one thing for certain: her life would never be the same again.